This week, Mikko Hypponen from WithSecure is with us to discuss corporate ransomware, a deep dive. Then we will do a pre-recorded interview with Jeremiah Grossman from our Hacker Heroes series. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. It's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things can get complicated and time-consuming fast. Now you can assess risk, secure the trust of your customers, and automate compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more with a single platform, Vanta. Vanta's leading trust management platform helps you automate evidence collection, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. Save hours of work by completing security questionnaires with Vanta AI. Go to securityweekly.com/Vanta to watch their on-demand demo. That's securityweekly.com/VANTA. BreachLock is a global leader in continuous attack surface discovery and penetration testing. Since BreachLock was founded, they are adding over 50 new customers every month. They have discovered over 1 million reported vulnerabilities and performed more than 20,000 pen testing engagements, including pen tests for over 15,000 web applications, 8,000 mobile apps, more than 100,000 APIs, over 10,000 cloud security audits, and over 200,000 network endpoints. They test your entire attack surface and help you mitigate your next cyber breach before it occurs. Know your risk. Contact BreachLock today. Visit securityweekly.com/BreachLock. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself. This is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 828, being recorded on, well, today is April 24th, but this is airing on Wednesday, May 8th. I'm, of course, Paul Asadorian. I am here with Mr. Bill Swearingen. Bill, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Had a great night last night at RSA, excited to be here.
Awesome. Miss Mandy Logan is here with us. Mandy, welcome.
Why, thank you so much. And I agree, RSA is amazing this year.
My good friend, Adrian Sanabria, has joined us for this segment. Adrian, welcome.
Yeah, I'm regretting going to so many parties. You know, it's you gotta face yourself at RSA.
Yeah, your voice sounds a little hoarse.
Had to get up.
My voice sounds a little hoarse because in real time, I'm just coming back from B-Sides Charm. So I had a really long weekend drinking with friends that we call work when we go to conferences. I have a quick announcement for our Security Weekly listeners. Join the digital identity community at the Aria Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, May 28th through the 31st. The 15th annual Identiverse will bring together over 3,000 security professionals for 4 days of world-class learning, engagement, and entertainment. As a community member, you receive 25% off your Identiverse 2024 tickets using the code IDV24-SW25. Register today at securityweekly.com/IDV2024. Mikko Hypponen is with us. He's the Chief Research Officer from WithSecure. Mikko is a keynote speaker and best-selling author. His TED Talk has been seen by 2 million people and has lectured at Oxford, Stanford, and Cambridge. Mikko lives in Finland and works with WithSecure. He's been there for a really long time. Mikko, welcome back to Security Weekly.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to sit down with you, man. I haven't seen you in like years.
Yeah.
First, I was confused one day, which is most days, but this particular day I was confused about a specific thing because it was F-Secure and then it was WithSecure. I just want to give you some people may not have realized that. Yeah, I'm not sure how long ago the name change took place.
Well, it's actually more complicated than that. The company originally, when it was founded, it was called Data Fellows, and it had a product range called F-Secure. So then eventually in the 1990s, we renamed the whole company from Data Fellows to F-Secure. 18 months ago, we split the company in 2 different companies. We did a spin-off for the consumer security business, and then we have the enterprise or corporate security business. The consumer business is called F-Secure, and the corporate business is called WithSecure. I work on the WithSecure side. So F-Secure still exists. It's a brand new company.
Fantastic. And we're talking about ransomware. So what got you started on digging into ransomware?
I've been looking at ransomware actually from 1991, if you believe, because in 1991 I studied reverse engineering malware, and I really got into it, and I realized I could collect every single malware which existed at the moment, and I could reverse engineer them all, because there's around 200 viruses and worms at the time in 1991, 1992, when I started my security career. And one of those viruses that I analyzed back then was called AIDS, the AIDS information Trojan, which was spreading on, well, actually, it wasn't Trojan, so it wasn't spreading, but it was mailed to people on floppy disks in mail. And it actually was a ransomware. It would encrypt your computer after you rebooted the computer for 90 times, and then it would ask you to pay by sending a wire transfer to Panama. This is exactly what we're fighting today, and this piece of malware is actually from 1988. So it's a total outlier. It's like, 20 years before we saw anyone else attempt this, and like 30 years before modern ransomware really became a problem. But that's when I started. I started analyzing ransomware in 1991.
Yeah, and it's pretty brazen, as most of us know, the payment for ransomware has changed over time. How you pay the ransom has changed. To just wire it to an account in Panama, at least even then, it was pretty easy to trace, no?
Sure. Actually, the guy who wrote the AIDS information Trojan, he was caught. He went into court. He pleaded insanity, I believe. He came to the court dressed as a caveman with bones in his beard and all that.
Wow.
It's a long story, but nevertheless,
that's awesome.
It's very true. The payment mechanisms are a key part of the development of ransomware. When we saw the first modern ransomware attacks, let's say GP Code or File Fixer or ICPP, these were around 2005, 2008. ICPP was 2010, I believe. They were using either credit cards or prepaid payment systems. You think gift cards to get the money. That's how you would pay the ransom. And this sort of worked at the time because the victims were not companies; they were home users. And the stories that these ransomware attacks early on were playing with the users, where they were claiming that you were breaking the law. So, for example, ICPP was a ransomware which claimed to be an international coalition fighting piracy. And you would get infected with this ransomware. It would lock your system. And then it would show you a message which would claim that your system has been locked because there's torrent files on your hard drive. And it would actually list the torrent files. If you had any real torrent files on your hard drive, it would list them. And then it would give you two options: go to court or settle with a pre-trial settlement, which you could do with the credit card. This is a ransomware Trojan, but it's way before Bitcoin entered into picture. And when Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies...
And so they were collecting credit card payments and gift card payments and largely targeting home users or individuals. And I always thought this was an interesting shift in ransomware, where it seemed like they were in the beginning, but in a certain time period, right? They were targeting home users. And the example I have, because I look at a lot of like IoT systems and firmware, was there was a brief stint of ransomwaring people's TVs. Like I found some vulnerabilities in people's televisions, right? They would ransomware them and collect the payment. Was Bitcoin really the shift that they turned and targeted enterprises, Mikko?
It didn't start immediately. Well, the first Bitcoin-enabled malware was 2013. That was CryptoLocker. Interestingly enough, you might remember the Zeus or Game Over Zeus botnet, which was initially used to spread mostly banking Trojans, developed by Yevgeny Bogachev, who's one of the Russian cybercriminal heads who still hasn't been caught. CryptoLocker, the first Bitcoin-enabled ransomware, was distributed through the Zeus botnet, which is quite interesting, like connection between two different worlds: banking Trojans and Bitcoin-enabled ransomware. First versions of CryptoLocker, the ransom payment they asked for was $200. So it's quite clear that the audience they were looking for was home users. The spreading mechanism through this botnet was mostly infected home computers. Early on, ransomware gangs or individual ransomware criminals, they went for the low-hanging fruit. The easiest systems to infect are home computers. What can you encrypt on home computers? Well, photos. That's what they were doing. They were encrypting your pictures and then asking you to pay $200 to get your photos back. And they were enabling Bitcoin at the time. And this is 2013. The Bitcoin white paper was released on Christmas 2008. Bitcoin really started to become visible around 2012, maybe. So it was pretty hard for people to get their hands on Bitcoin to pay the ransom. But this is how the problem really started. And it took a while before the attackers realized that they could ask for much, much larger ransom amounts if they go after corporate targets.
Yeah, that's an interesting shift. Adrian, Bill, Mandy, do you folks have questions for Mikko?
Yeah, I do. I was a part of the security world during that time, so I remember all of that. I'm just curious, how have things shifted now, right? So if you take a look at Zeus and Crypto Locker, what are the tactics now that ransomware groups are using, and how does it differ from there?
Today, the word I use for the largest ransomware gangs is cybercrime unicorns. Just like we refer to the largest and most valuable technology startups to be unicorn companies, these typically Russian gangs, they are cybercrime unicorns. If you look at the amount of money they're making, if you look at their revenue, their profit, if you look at how wealthy they are, if these would be private companies, they would absolutely be considered to be unicorns. Now, of course, cybercrime gangs will never do an IPO, so they're not real unicorn. But I think it's a good way of thinking about how powerful and how wealthy these gangs have become. And the wealthy part doesn't just come from the fact that they are making more and more money every year because there's more and more attacks and more companies are paying the ransom. It's also the fact that when they make money, they keep the money in cryptocurrencies. They keep it in Bitcoin or Monero or Zcash or what might have you, instead of rubles or yuans or dollars or euros. And of course, that means that these gangs have almost automatically become very wealthy simply from the fact that they've been holding large amounts of Bitcoins for many years. And that's a bit unfortunate.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find really interesting with that shift to cryptocurrency is I saw the shift into Bitcoin. And then, as you just mentioned, I saw it shift into Monero, which is a privacy backed coin. But I've also seen in the last couple of years, it's really shifted back to Bitcoin. And I think it truly becomes just how easy is it to get the payment, right? But I'm curious from your standpoint, when these criminals, these criminal gangs are using Bitcoin, from a law enforcement perspective, do you think that presents a risk to them? I'm curious around the strategy of the follow the money, right? And now that it really does seem like they're back to only using, in my world at least, only using Bitcoin. I'm wondering are you seeing the same thing? Do you have any opinions on that, or? Just what are you seeing?
Yes, it is Bitcoin very, very clearly. When we look at other aspects of cybercrime, when you look at different Tor forms where you can buy stolen data or malware, what have you, quite often that's Monero or Zcash. But when you look at Bitcoin, ransomware payments, it is definitely Bitcoin. They've tried different systems, but they've gone back to Bitcoin for the reason you mentioned. For the victims, Bitcoin is the easiest one to get your hands on, and people understand Bitcoin much better than anything else. From the point of view of the criminals, it doesn't really matter if they get it in Monero or Bitcoin or what have you. They can just route or reroute the traffic. They can take the Bitcoin and buy Monero with that, and then buy Zcash with that, and Ethereum with that. And then, if they wish, bring it back to Bitcoin, trying to hide the tracks as well as they can. Out of all the cryptocurrencies, tracking Bitcoin money movements is that's the best understood art by law enforcement. Bitcoin blockchain is public. You can do a lot of tracking, and many law enforcement agencies have capabilities in there. Monero, for example, does have a double-blind blockchain, so it's a much harder thing to track. Although we have one recent case from the last year, where there was a ransom incident against the psychotherapy clinic right here in my home country of Finland. And the Finnish Central Criminal Police actually tracked with high confidence the Monero money movements, which I believe is the first case anywhere in the world where law enforcement has tracked Monero. They don't have 100% proof, but I think it's pretty damning that they have a suspect who has been arrested, who's actually on trial right now. And out of all possible people who could have received the payment done by the police in the name of one of the victims, the money ended up in the wallet of the suspect. They can't prove every single step on the way, but it's highly unlikely that that of all the possible options, the money movement would have ended up in this guy's wallet, and that's what their tracking would prove. So they have capabilities with Monero today as well.
Was that Vastamo?
That was the Vastamo case. It's a case I work closely with myself, and let me just mention, if people are interested in the case, I got a book which came out 16 months ago, titled "If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable," and on the website of the book, which is ifitsmartitsvulnerable.com, I have one chapter available for people to read, and that's the Vastamo chapter. It goes through in detail what happened with the psychotherapy hack and how was the data stolen and what happened. It is a highly unusual case in many ways. We rarely see cases where the ransom is not only asked from the entity, the company or the public sector actor that was breached, but also from the individual victims. So in this case, the attacker asked payments from every single patient, like pay me or your psychotherapy notes will be leaked online. And that's really rare.
In terms of sectors that ransomware groups are targeting, Mikko, how has that changed over time? And is there really like a moral or ethical code among criminals to not attack hospitals, children's hospitals, and things like that?
Some gangs have very clear internal rules about targets that they don't want to hit. Some Russian gangs avoid U.S. government. They don't want to hit U.S. governmental targets because they don't want to become persons of interest or groups of interest. Avoiding hospitals, some groups do that. Most of them avoid Russian targets because they operate from within Russia. Not all of them, but a big part of them do. And the reason why they avoid Russian targets is not really about being patriotic. It's about avoiding local law enforcement. Russian cops don't really care if the victims are in faraway countries. However, whenever I talk to our companies or enterprises or our clients, I've never spoken to a company which would sort of assume that we will be hit by ransomware next. Everybody sort of assumes that they're not going to hit us. Why would they hit us? Especially if the company isn't very large or well known. They have this notion that how would they find us? We're not interesting. Why would they attack us? And what I almost always recommend to companies like this, or to the CISOs or CIOs who I speak with, is to take a look at one of these leak sites. Just go to Tor, install a Tor browser, go to Tor hidden service. I give them the address for some large leak site and simply ask them to scroll down the list. I especially liked the Lockbit website when it was still operational in the good old way it used to be, because Lockbit had a few thousand victims listed. And the list you just kept scrolling the list of companies and it would never end. More and more and more. And then you look at the victims: private sector, public sector, enterprises, governmental targets from all over the world, from all possible business areas, from all possible sizes. So right next to each other, you would have a furniture company from Denmark, then a bank from Vancouver, then a steel mill from Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's as if someone would have shot at the internet with a shotgun and hit random targets. That's what it looks like. And it's a real eye-opener to companies when they realize that, if these organizations were hit, we can definitely be hit. And the reason why it looks so random is that these large ransomware as a service gangs, they buy access to these victim systems from initial access brokers who don't really choose what business areas to target. No, they start from a vulnerability. Like we have a Cisco VPN 0 or 5-day or 200-day, what have you. Let's scan the internet to find all the vulnerable VPNs. We have an RDP vulnerability. Let's scan the whole IPv4 address range. It takes you 2 hours. And you end up with the list of random organizations which have vulnerable servers, and that's what they're going to target. And that's why it looks like somebody would have shot at the internet with a shotgun.
Yeah, Adrian, you had some questions that were in my brain too about like the methods used to perform the initial compromise, right?
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of people say that ransomware has been almost a good thing for cybersecurity because it's forced us to mature and innovate. But I sometimes wonder if we're innovating the right things. Like I remember, speaking of Jeremiah Grossman, who Paul, you're going to have a conversation with after this episode. We were talking about, okay, they're encrypting files now, but what else could they do? What other extortion mechanisms could they use other than, and this is back in 2015 that me and Jeremiah are having this conversation on Twitter. And sure enough, they start stealing your files and threatening to expose them. So Mikko, I wonder, if we've been a little bit myopic here in, going after just one specific outcome or one specific mechanism that the attackers could use to make you pay.
Sure. And there's been clear evolution in this, how this has changed. Early on, it was only about locking your files, nothing else. And it, by the way, it did have a very real effect on security of companies. If ransomware has done nothing else, it really has. Certainly, it has improved backup policies in companies. Companies take better backups. They test their backups. They make sure they can not only recover the backups, but also do it in timely manner, because there were plenty of companies early on which were hit by ransomware and they had backups. Then they realized that it would take 3 weeks to recover all the backups because they were so slow. They never tested the performance of the recovery. So they ended up paying the ransom just to get the files back quicker. So yeah, backup processes and testing of backups, that clearly has improved because of this problem. And that's one of the reasons why double extortion or the leak site phenomenon became a thing, which started in 2019. I believe May's ransomware gang, once again from Russia, was the first one to actually do double extortion and had a concrete leak site that they used to put up the pressure to make sure that even if you could recover your files and carry on because your backups were offline and you could recover them quickly enough, you still had the problem that your secrets would be leaked on the internet. And I've spoken to many companies which have been hit by ransomware, and the first reaction from the leadership team, first reaction from the decision makers or from the board is that, of course, we're not going to pay the ransom. Like, we're not going to do this. I mean, it might be tough, but, we don't want to negotiate with criminals. That's only going to make the problem larger. Then they realize that it's not just your patent applications and your price negotiations, which would become public. The things that these guys would leak online would include emails of your employees talking about private health topics with the corporate healthcare, like really like personal things that you don't want to leak or can't leak online. And this is one of the explanations why some companies pay the ransom. And I mean, we know that ransomware gangs, the total amount of cryptocurrency entering their wallets is over $1 billion last year. So the money moving in this area is significant. And that also means that these gangs are more and more professional. they can invest into their attacks, and there's more and more people joining these gangs, and more gangs are being set up.
So one of the things that I've seen, you mentioned the Lockbit site, and one of the biggest trends that I would say that for me over the last 10 months, maybe a year, is that there are secondary gangs, so a second threat actor that is monitoring those data leak sites and grabbing that data from the Lockbit site or whatever and retargeting the victims for additional payments. And what's been really interesting for me is these secondary threat actors. They're less skilled. They're primarily scam artists, the help desk phone call type people, but are now using that data to retarget past victims from other ransomware groups. And so you mentioned things like, the private emails or sometimes it's photos or whatever, seeing them being retargeted as a result of the companies not being paid. And it's disheartening when you're working with a company that has solved problem one, right? So we've locked down our systems. We decided not to pay. We've made that decision that we're just going to take that hit, right? And then your employees start getting emailed by a second threat actor demanding, now we're back to that $200 payment, right? Where the payment now is now back towards the person.
So wait, I have a question. Does the original ransomware actor steal the data and then sell that data to someone else? Or are they making money on the second? Even if they got a ransomware payment, they could still sell the data to a third party, and then that third party is going to extort for more money? Is that?
So what I've seen, and I'd like to hear Mikko answer that, but from what I've seen is that the two actors are not related at all. It's just somebody sitting there watching the Lockbit data leak site, grabbing that data, going through it. What can I ransom that person? But I'm curious how Mikko feels about, there's always that question, right? So does the first threat actor, the ransomware group, do they sell that data to other groups? I'm curious how you feel about that.
Depends on the group. For example, Akiras, which has been really growing their operations over the last 6 months, that they do sell the information. If you don't pay the ransom, instead of posting it on their leak site, they will sell it on the dark web or try to sell it on the dark web. Typically successfully sell it to someone who's willing to pay money for this information. It's exactly for the scenario you're describing, Bill. They might be trying to sell it to competitors, like here's like intelligence about your competitors, but that's hard to make happen. But definitely there are other threat actors who are buying email archives, hoping that there's passwords inside there or documents, hoping there's like access information which they could use to target the same company or another company, because there's definitely information you can use to make new attacks, or then use it as directed attacks against the individual people, like you described, Bill. Other groups don't do this. Lockbit just posts the information on their website. In fact, we know some victims, some companies which decided that they don't pay. I mean, they lost data. They didn't have backups of everything. And they recovered some of their files from the Lockbit leak site by downloading the leaks themselves, which is an interesting data recovery mechanism. But this has actually happened. Another fun anecdote about the cases throughout the ransomware history that I find interesting is that I know of 3 cases where ransomware gangs were targeting law enforcement agencies. And out of those cases, I know 2 where the ransom was paid, which means cops paid money to criminals to get their files back, which is quite neat.
Wow. I wonder if they did that with Bitcoin that they seized from another operation. I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying
it's a circle of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one more thing I want to mention about what happens when these gangs become so professional, so so wealthy and are able to run their operations as organized crime does, and that's branding. Already here we've discussed Akira and Lockbit, or Black Pasta or Clop, or any of these large gangs. They all have a brand. Certainly, that brand is only known for people working inside IT or IT security. But in those circles, these are very strong brands, and it's interesting to think about an organized cybercrime gang doing branding, picking a name, running a website, having a logo designed. Lockbit ran a competition where people were taking tattoos of the Lockbit logo on themselves. And what I believe they're trying to do here is exactly the same thing that real world organized crime gangs do. Think about gangs like Hells Angels. Hells Angels branding is one of the strongest brands in the world. That's a very strong brand. Even more importantly, it's a scary brand. It's a dangerous brand. Bandidos, Cosa Nostra, MS-13, these are brands. And they're the kind of brands that you don't want to cross. And that's exactly what these cybercrime gangs are trying to do. So you can imagine that you work for the IT department of a company, you come to the office Monday morning only to realize that, oh my God, we've been hit by ransomware. And then, oh my God, it's Clop. Oh my God, it's Conti. Oh my God, it's Akira. Because you know these gangs by reputation, and the reputation is scary. You know these guys have been in business for years. You know that they know what they're doing. You know that it's serious. You know that you will not be able to crack the encryption. But you also know that if you play ball, if you pay the ransom, it will work. Because there's so many previous victims who've done it. And you can talk to previous victims and they will tell you how they ended up paying the ransom and they got the files back and they weren't attacked again and all that. 5 out of 5 would recommend. So these guys are building a brand that they are criminals, but they're honest criminals.
And that's just I was going to say that's forcing people to pay, and it's kind of similar to the Gambino crime family or whatever crime family built a name for themselves. And if you don't pay, bad things are going to happen to you. But if you do pay, they're a business as well. And it seems like the ransomware gangs are kind of similar in that respect.
Do you want to know?
Well, I was going to say,
do you know what's the worst thing that ever happened to the good reputation of ransomware gangs? That was the 2017 WannaCry and NotPetya, the 2 largest ransomware incidents in history, both of which didn't work, both of which did not recover your files. It must have been really bad hit from the point of view of these gangs, which were like building their reputation for years. And then North Korea comes with a botched quick hack ransomware WannaCry based on the leaked NSA vulnerability and hit billions of targets worldwide. And the payment mechanism didn't work. They didn't really test it through before they unleashed it. It was actually a self-spreading worm. That's why it went around the world and hit so many places. And then 3 months later, NotPetya, which looks like ransomware, but actually it's not ransomware at all. It's actually a cyber weapon developed by GRU of the Russian military intelligence. It really tried to be a devastating hit against the critical infrastructure, in fact, all infrastructure of Ukraine, but it got out of control and hit tons of targets in the West. And there was no recovery mechanism. It showed you a Bitcoin address. It went nowhere. There was no way. I mean, it didn't encrypt files. It wiped files. It just looked like ransom. That was the cover story. And this really destroyed the reputation for quite a while for real ransomware gangs.
Sorry, Bill, you had a question or comment, and then Mandy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, whoever the brand manager of Akira is killing it. Their website is unbelievable. I don't want to, I consider them a criminal organization, and I don't support criminals or anything. But the first time I saw their data leaks, I was just blown away, and just they've got a very retro style. Their data leak site kind of looks like an old terminal, and you have to type in commands to be able to see the list of the companies, those kind of things. It's really neat. That was my only comment.
Let me unfortunately burst the bubble. They are using a ready-made graphics user interface library. They didn't write that themselves.
Don't do that to me, Mikko. Don't do it to me. Yeah.
It's great. The user interface is great, but they didn't do it themselves.
Yeah.
Mia, you had a question.
I do. I mean, this has been fascinating. I have a lot of thoughts, but since we were talking about corporate ransomware and talking about the next 10 years, so the past 10 years, the next 10 years, and the frontline security practitioners, to hear this and you think about this organized crime, and to my way of thinking, because of being able to switch over to Bitcoin, there's so much less heaviness on their side of having to do the same amount of money laundering that other organized crime has had to do. And that in and of itself, I feel like gives the cybercrime unicorns a much stronger and steadier base in what they're willing to go after. So the corporate side, the frontline security practitioners that wake up and, oh, bam, we're hit with this. Have you seen or heard, or what do you think about for the individual security practitioners that are now basically standing on the precipice of something horrible, and they have the entire weight of an incredibly organized and incredibly strong entity coming at them? And for those individual practitioners, since they're in a corporate landscape in general, do you see them getting resources and feeling like they have enough backup to be effective? And I don't mean just the technological side, but actually from law enforcement or from the corporations as a whole.
Well, no. My forecast for the next decade is that it's going to get worse. Unfortunately, I believe we've only seen the very beginning of this problem. And the thing where we are failing the hardest about the whole ransomware problem is that we really are not catching these criminals, and we're not putting them behind the bars. That's the biggest failure we have. There was a bright couple of months in 2021, right after Colonial Pipeline and JBS Foods, when the US State Department started offering these $10 million bounties through the Rewards for Justice program for information leading to arrests of some of the largest ransomware gangs. And by the way, 10 million, the bounty they were offering, that's the same bounty they're offering to many terrorist leaders, which is an interesting thought that US government takes the ransomware problem money-wise as seriously as ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Or some of the operatives operating from there. Now, when that program, when Rewards for Justice started offering rewards for information leading to arrests of these gang members, it also unofficially offers immunity from prosecution. And that then quickly becomes a game theory experiment. Imagine that you are a member of one of these gangs. You read the news. The news says that there's $10 million. If I rat my friends, if I do, all my friends will go to jail, but I won't. I'm going to get $10 million. And then you realize that all my friends are reading the news as well. The first one to move gets everything. Everyone else loses everything. And this works. This actually started burning groups like Revil or REvil from the inside. And we had this precious couple of months from October 2021 when we saw a very nice, healthy amount of arrests, including arrests done by Russian law enforcement inside Russia, arresting Russian cyber criminals. Of course, they're not going to extradite them anywhere, but at least they're arresting them. Unfortunately, that all stopped on the 27th of February 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. And or invaded them again, and that's where all this cooperation stopped, and it's back to dark ages, unfortunately. But from the point of view of the individual practitioner, the support from law enforcement clearly is the biggest problem we have. But there's plenty of things you can do by yourself. Understanding that this problem isn't going to go away. This is a long-term fight. We will have to be fighting this problem for years and years, maybe decades to come. You can't hide because of what we discussed about these gangs using their shotgun to shot at the internet. Eventually, they're going to hit you. You need visibility. You need to be able to understand what you have an inventory of everything you need to protect. You need to have a baseline, understand what normal looks like in your network, so you have some chance of detecting when something abnormal happens. You need to be able to patch better. Most of these gangs use old exploits. We have exceptions, like the Move It was a 0-day exploit that Cop was using a year ago, but that's not normal. Normally they're using old vulnerabilities, so if you just patch right and you know everything you need to patch, you're in great shape, and you can then manage your exposure. And the worst case scenario is that they will then still get in, but if you have the visibility, you will be able to detect that there is a breach. Hopefully you will be able to react before the breach becomes a ransomware incident.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, Mikko? Adrian and I did a deep dive into attack surface management a few years ago, and I frequently come back to that, and I think you can certainly lower the probability that you'll be a target for ransomware if you have a really good attack surface management or monitoring program, but you also have to act upon it too, right? You mentioned patching. It's one thing to have a great service that's telling you about your external exposures, but it's another thing to make sure you're patching that stuff, right? We've seen a lot of folks fall victim. MITRE was one of the most recent ones because they had these VPN appliances just hanging out on the internet with exploitable vulnerabilities.
Yeah. You have to have an inventory. You have to have visibility into your network. The good thing about current security systems is that since AI, of course, the big buzzword, it's changing everything. Well, this is one part where it really helps. I mean, if you have tons and tons of visibility information, logs, you build a baseline, you understand, or the system understands what a normal day in the life of your organization looks like, then the system can easily detect the anomalies, things that rarely happen. Like, why are these two servers speaking to each other? They've never done that before. Why is that laptop sending information to a weird place? That's what these algorithms and AI-based systems are really good at spotting, much better than humans. So hopefully that's going to be one of the things which will make securing our systems better. The downside is that eventually we will see organized cybercrime gangs using full automation for the attacks as well, which is something we haven't seen yet.
Right. Adrian, you had a question or comment about a mediocre pen test.
Yeah. So, rewinding a bit to 2011, Mikko, I don't know if you remember this keynote that Haroon Mir did at 44Con, where he said penetration testing considered harmful, I think was the title of the talk. And one of the points of that talk was that at the time, at least, in the malware landscape, everything was very different in 2011. We had a lot of, that was the age of custom malware, that would get served in drive-by, browsers were in a different state back then. And the point there was that we weren't emulating adversaries when we did penetration tests. And then we fast forward to today, and every time I do a postmortem or look at how a ransomware case happens, take out the actual malware piece, which is often, the final step, the step 17. If you look at how they get in, and how they pivot, how they laterally move, it all just looks like an old pen test, a mediocre. So that's where the mediocre pen test comes in. And haven't we been getting these mediocre pen tests for decades now? And here come ransomware, and everything's come full circle. And now the ransomware attacks are emulating bad pen tests from 10 years ago, and we're not prepared for it somehow.
And I'd also add that you could use AI to do a certain, I don't want to say a mediocre pen test, but you can use AI and machine learning to do a fairly decent pen test, right? It's not going to replace a human, but you can automate that just the same way the attackers are going to automate it as well.
Yeah, particularly with all the low-hanging fruit, we're talking about with attack surface management, and the shotgun blast is all just low-hanging fruit, vulnerabilities that they know they can go after, cred stuffing, just firing and seeing what gets you logged into GitHub, for example. But yeah, Mikko, just curious of your thoughts on, that's a part of this that really bothers me is, trying to solve the malware problem is one thing, but they can keep getting in, because it's more of a holistic problem. We can't defend against a mediocre pen test. I don't know.
I don't know either. Maybe it would then be enough that you would just be a harder target than all the other targets. Be a little bit higher hanging fruit. Faster than the bear, indeed. I don't like that, but it would probably work in practice as well. And interestingly, we've also seen examples of crime gangs recruiting pen testers to work for them. In some cases, so that they've actually set up fake companies as front ends. So the pen testers actually believe they're working for a real company and doing a real pen test, except the target has never ordered a pen test. And that's another example on how professional the attackers are becoming. They're investing into recruiting professionals and running front ends to make them believe they're working for a real company.
Yeah, the joke is that there's some Venn diagram of certified ethical hackers and ransomware actors that overlaps, right?
Right. It's true. There's also a rumor I've heard from a couple of different places that at least one of these ransomware gangs has a business analyst working for them, which I could believe. If you look at, for example, the Conti Leaks, they had an HR department, they had a lawyer. Why wouldn't they have a business analyst? And business analysts would be really valuable for setting the right price. So one of the big challenges for these ransomware gangs is what's the right size for the ransom? What's something the victim can actually pay, but also to make sure they're not leaving money on the table. And you can easily have your own analyst look at the books, steal the bookkeeping from the victim, all the financial figures, and give it to the criminal analyst who just goes through the books and comes up with a figure overnight. And this company has this much cash, this much loans, this much short-term things they can sell overnight. This is the right ransom we should be asking from them, which totally then changes the negotiation part where all companies are trying to haggle down the ransom they're supposed to pay.
Man, you had a question about mobile security. I want to say, Mikko,
I do.
Did you do a bunch of stuff with mobile security, especially back in the day too, right?
I am in Finland. This is Nokia Landia. Of course we did.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it was Nokia stuff. There was that famous, was it you would call it a football game, a soccer game where there was a Bluetooth worm that ran around.
Sure.
Story always sticks in my mind.
Yeah, I was there. I was on location. It was the world championship for what is it? Sports championship. It
was a long time ago.
This is 2006 or 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
Bluetooth worms were a big problem, but they were killed or snipped in the bud by changing the way Bluetooth protocol works. But we did have a very, very early offerings for Bluetooth security way before iPhone. iPhone came out in 2007, right? So we did see some outbreaks, and we had, I don't know, tens of thousands of infected Symbian handsets around the world at the time. But of course, those times are quite different. And if you look at the modern mobile systems, they're actually surprisingly secure.
Well, and that brings up one of my questions because especially being that you are from Finland, and as I believe you noted in your book, that more households in Finland solely use mobile access. And stating that, especially on Android systems, that the security, I think you were referencing malware more specifically, but security overall in the Android system was far superior to any computer, any home computer. Has that translated to you recommending to corporations or security operations to do sensitive stuff on mobile versus any of their endpoints at their any other physical machine?
Yes, it does. I've done recommendations like that myself. I know of companies which, while they were recovering from a ransomware incident, instead of replacing their infected Windows computers with new Windows reinstall. They changed their Windows laptops into Chromebooks. Try getting ransomware onto a Chromebook. It's much, much harder. How would you even infect it? It's a totally different scenario. And for most employees in corporate environment, the Chromebook is fine. It runs Excel or whatever the Google equivalent is, or it runs a browser and you can do almost everything. It runs Salesforce inside your browser. What else do you need if you're a sales guy? It's a different story if you're a developer, but most of us are not developers. And so these more restricted devices are clearly superior, whether it's an iPad or an Android phone or an iPhone or a Chromebook. And I think it's one of the big security success stories of the last 15 years. We've finally been able to crack one of the old challenges we had. We used to think that if the attacker gets physical access, it's game over. That's no longer true. That simply isn't true. This is what we used to think. But okay, the best example I can give on that is Xbox One, Microsoft Xbox One, which, yeah, sure, it's a games console, but it is a computer. It runs Windows. The operating system inside Xbox is Windows. It's been out for over 10 years now. Nobody's cracked it. Millions and millions of people have these. They can touch it, they can open it, and solder anything they want inside. Nobody's been able to run their own code on it 10 years later, which is remarkable. It's a Windows computer which has been locked down so well. After 10 years, nobody's cracked it. So
that's because Microsoft looks at the end user or consumer of Xbox as the adversary.
Absolutely.
They're actually quoted. They're quoted as saying that. They're not just making that up. They're quoted as saying that.
But still, isn't that a huge accomplishment?
I agree.
It's great. And it's not too far away from the security model of your iPhone. Apple doesn't say that you're the adversary, but clearly they're trying to prevent you from running code. And they're successful. Mm-hmm. I think the best example on how good iOS security is in practice is the fact that if you want to buy, NSO's Pegasus to target someone, you have to pay $100,000 per victim. If it costs $100,000 to crack one end user's iPhone, I think that's a success story, not a failure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the exploits that I've seen come out of NSO Group have been, I've been looking at exploits and covering on the show for 19 years. That was the best one I've ever seen. Like, hands down, the most amazing exploit or chain of exploits, right? That I've ever seen. Because they're forcing them to do, Manny from Google talks about this, about how we've forced attackers in certain environments to chain exploits together. And we've seen that on Android, although all Android is not the same. I mean, I guess it's like any technology. I have seen Android devices that are just horrible. I mean, from supply chain breaches to just the way that it's configured and put together is pretty awful, which is why I have a phone from Google, because they do, I think, the best job of putting together a more secure Android platform.
And a great job of keeping it up to date, which I think is the biggest problem in Android ecosystem, that they simply don't get the patches they need.
Right. Well, in some Android devices, they keep it up to date and they give you fresh copies of malware. Awesome. So, Mikko, by the time this airs, you will have given your talk at RSA. What are some of the big takeaways and summaries that you want everyone to take away from it that didn't attend your talk?
Well, I'm an optimist by design, but I don't see a bright future regarding ransomware. Like I said, I think it's only beginning. We've seen the first decade, it's going to get worse. We will see more victims, more money moving into this area. Unless law enforcement somehow is able to start catching more of these gangs, it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse. And many of these leaders of these gangs are fairly visible. They are floating their wealth, showing the Lambos and Rolls Royces they drive around in St. Petersburg or in Moscow. And that brings new people into the area. They want to get some of that. They want to become millionaires. And the easiest way to do that, if you know how to program, the fastest way to do it might be to get into cybercrime. And that's exactly the wrong development. That's what we should be able to cut down somehow. So that's what I'll be speaking about at RSA as well. And I'm really, personally, really happy that I'll be doing a keynote at RSA. I had a long-term goal for myself early on in my career that I want to speak. I want to have a talk in the three largest cybersecurity conferences. So DEF CON, Black Hat, RSA. I want to speak in all of them. Well, I did that. I've spoken, 10 times in each one of those by now. So then the next goal I set for myself is that I want to do a keynote in RSA, Black Hat, and DEF CON. I did DEF CON 11 years ago. I did Black Hat 4 years ago, and now RSA. So I'm really happy about that.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Well, we thoroughly enjoyed our time today, Mikko, in discussing ransomware. It was awesome. I know it's weird because you will have given your talk, but great luck on your keynote. I think it's gonna be awesome. And what is your book one more time for our audience?
All right. It's called If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable. The website is ifitsmartitsvulnerable.com. If you are on location in RSA, it's available in the RSA bookstore. I'll be doing a book signing there.
Sweet. Mikko, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next is our pre-recorded interview from our Hacker Heroes series with Jeremiah Grossman. It's a really good one. Stay tuned.